All right, welcome back to Yahoo Finance Live on this Tuesday morning. As we continue to grow out of the pandemic, it seems the next question on how to make the economy work for more people is going to revolve around wages. Certainly, there was a positive response to people getting stimulus checks, essentially saying that not enough people had enough money. Democrats now taking up the issue of how to raise the national minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2025. But Yahoo Finance's Rick Newman thinks he has perhaps a more workable proposal here, Rick, for Democrats to pursue. Now, we saw House Democrats pass the $1.9 trillion stimulus package last week. Exactly what happens with that certainly remains to be seen. But you wrote on Yahoo Finance about how you're thinking about a potentially more workable solution for the minimum wage. And really, it just goes by geography.
I actually got looking into this because some readers have read stories I've written about the minimum wage, and a few of them said, why do we have to have a single minimum wage at the federal level? Why can't we have regional variation? So, it's a good question. I looked into it, and it turns out there was a proposal by some Democrats in the House in 2019 for not a single minimum wage increase, but 5 different minimum wage tiers, if you will. So I asked some economists, does this make sense? And yes, it actually does make sense. Everybody knows there's a large variation in the, living costs between places like New York and San Francisco on one hand, and Moline, Illinois, and Topeka, Kansas on the other hand. Places in the Midwest and South that just, where living costs are just not that high. And a $15 minimum wage, which is the Bernie Sanders ask, companies just can't pay that in some of those areas. So you actually could impose a tiered federal minimum wage so that it would be, maybe it would hit $15 in some parts of the country, but in lower cost areas, it might only hit $11 or $12. And that might be something that, politicians from all these different states could actually live with.
Well, I guess they wouldn't have a choice if it was federal legislation. And I guess the question is, why are minimum wages so low in so many areas? Because there isn't, yes, there's the federal minimum wage, but it's pretty much determined on a state by state basis. Why haven't we seen more states already raise the minimum wages?
Honestly, we have seen, so the way this works is any state or city can legally impose a minimum wage that's higher than the federal level. You can't have a lower minimum wage, but you can have higher. And the federal level is at $7.25. It's been at that level for 11 years, since 2009, and obviously it just erodes. So there are some cities and states that have actually imposed their own minimum wages. The minimum wage in San Francisco right now is $16.07. So if you had a $15 minimum wage, it wouldn't even matter in San Francisco. I think Seattle has a minimum wage above $15. But there are a lot of places where states and localities, and especially rural areas, where they have not imposed a local minimum wage. So the $7.25 federal level still applies. And that level has just eroded over time. And I think that there is a good case to say it should be higher than $7.25. In fact, some Republicans would probably vote for raising the minimum wage above $7.25. But if you think about it, going from $7.25 to $15, even if you phase it in over a couple of years, you're still more than doubling the minimum wage. And for, think about small businesses that might employ 5 or 10 people. They won't be able to pay everybody $15. So they're going to say, well, we had 10 employees, we can afford to pay 7 at $15. And there's a lot of research that shows if you do push it too high, companies will get rid of some workers.
Rick, that leads me to another point that I wanted to talk with you about. We had a story in this show yesterday that Brian Sazi brought us about Costco raising its minimum wage for its employees, I think, to $16 an hour nationally. And you bring up that, big employers like Costco are not really the ones that are too worried about minimum wage legislation. If anything, it makes their competitive position even stronger, and that the majority of businesses paying minimum wage are, not 10-person shops. They are 2 or 3, 4-person kind of businesses.
Absolutely. So this is one area where corporate America is really not the problem, the big companies. I think we should say that for all the companies we do hear about having, making it 15, Costco, Amazon, for example, there are others. There probably are still a lot that don't of big companies with, let's say, thousands of employees who are not offering a starting wage of $15. But if you were to impose $15 on these companies, they would find a way to do it. But even at the big company level, there is a trade-off between labor costs and labor-saving technology. And if your labor costs go up, you're going to look for ways to lower labor costs, which is find technology that can replace laborers, do more automation. And the Congressional Budget Office analyzed if we had a $15 minimum wage nationally, and they found, yes, a lot of people would get paid more, and it would lift 900,000 people out of poverty, but it would also kill 1.4 million jobs. So you would be making some people worse off in order to make some people better off. And that's not really the right way to approach policy, which is why I come back to this idea of let's have a few different tiers of minimum wage so that you can, apply this on a regional basis as it makes sense.
And then, Rick, I mean, another concern that we're kind of watching specifically with the economy is inflation, which has not really been anywhere for a long time. Now, housing inflation obviously is something that everyone can feel, but broad price inflation has not been present, since you were a Rugrat. So, how does that maybe factor in here as well? Because a pretty stable price level, I think, maybe gives the business lobby, business interests, more ability to say we can't raise wages. But if all of a sudden that starts accelerating, it would seem to me that maybe that argument starts to fall apart a little.
Yeah, labor inflation is the inflation that the Federal Reserve cares about, as we have talked about many times. And let's go back to the CBO study. I mean, they did find. They did not really forecast a change in inflation, but they did find that prices would go up if you had a $15 federal minimum wage. And one of the way they look at it, since they look at the federal budget, they found that federal expenditures would actually go up because products would get more expensive. So yes, you would see some sort of labor inflation at 15. I want to reiterate, we are not going to have a $15 minimum wage across the country. Even all Democrats don't even support that. So Bernie Sanders can yell as loud as he wants. He is not going to get a universal $15 minimum wage. So what are the sort of minimum wage absolutists going to do? Are they going to at some point say, okay, we realize we're not going to get 15, we will settle for 13 or 11 or a tiered structure or something? Or are they just going to say it's 15 or nothing? And so far, Bernie Sanders and the people who support him have not showed any sign of bending. They're sort of like 15 or bust. So I'm not sure where this is going. It's possible that even with Democrats controlling both houses of Congress, we could end up with no increase in the minimum wage this year.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, Rick, the way you kind of outlined it at the top of the current state of play where New York City's, Florida, the state of Florida is going to a $15 minimum wage. It's just going to happen the way Republicans want it, right? It goes individually by cities and then individually by states, but there will be like 40 counties in Iowa where you can still pay someone $77.25 an hour, and that's the way that the free market capital.
Look what I started talking about, a tiered minimum wage at the federal level, but we're going to end up with a tiered minimum wage anyway. So the one difference is going to be there are going to be many pockets of the country, and there are a lot of rural areas where it is going to remain at that very low $7.25 level. So I think what we really should be talking about is finding ways to help the people who are still stuck at $7.25 and they're not in some part of the country that is deciding to raise the minimum wage on their own.
Yep. Well, maybe sometime soon there'll be a $1,400 check coming their way. That certainly has worked over the last. That has certainly worked over the last year or so. All right, Rick Newman, always fun. Good to talk to you this morning.
Bye, guys.